Welcome back to the Spotlight Media podcast. I'm your host, David Flores, CEO of Spotlight Media. And my guest here today is James Lanthier, CEO of Mindset Pharma. You can find them on the CSE under MSET, the FSC under 9DF, and the OTCQB under MSSTF. James, it's been a while, but great to see you again. How are you doing today?
I'm good, David. Great to see you again as well.
Yeah, most definitely. And, here we are at the tail end of 2022. It's been an interesting year to say the least. Some highs, some lows. We'll get into a little bit of that over the course of our conversation here. But I want to kick things off here by giving you an opportunity to elaborate on something, that you mentioned in your year-end shareholder letter, which was put out a couple of weeks ago. And I want to highlight this statement here because I think it's an important statement that I view as kind of the backbone, if you will, of Mindset Pharma. And the statement is, Mindset is focused on a singular goal to bring best-in-class optimized psychedelic medications to patients in need. Again, a very important statement. So I want to open the platform here to you to give you an opportunity to elaborate a little bit on it, what it actually means to you, because again, I think it's an important statement here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the big differentiators, big differences, with Mindset compared to, a lot of other companies in the medical psychedelic space has been really our focus. And we've really, defined ourselves as much by what we don't do as what we do. We didn't start the company with a focus on anything other than trying to discover and develop new, better drugs. I mean, in a lot of ways, the work that Mindset is doing is really kind of just extending the work on in a bit of a broader way than than many of kind of the early chemists, the famous chemists, working in the space. We're just trying to do a more modern version of that, where we're trying to make new drugs, where we're trying to improve on some of the potential shortcomings of the known drugs, and really shortcomings in how they could be used as medicines for big patient groups with compromised people with compromised health. Safer, different durations of, shorter duration, longer duration, different intensities, more predictable. Those are the kinds of things that we're trying to adjust for. And, really, this is in a lot of ways just like the march of science. This is what science, modern science and modern, biotech and pharmacology try to do is you take an existing drug or an existing target and you try to make better drugs. And in this case, we really felt like this was a big opportunity because it was a big opportunity to help to do even better job of helping patients, because we felt like the first generation drugs didn't perfectly serve patients. And also we really are looking to align in a lot of ways with pharma, and in our view, and pharma was going to play a really important role in the space. They pick a subset of medicine. They're involved in getting the drugs to patients, and to really attract the interest of pharma and the investors who support pharma, you need drugs that are chemically novel and are new and patentable. In a way that the known psychedelic drugs just aren't, because they've been in the public domain for decades. So that's been the focus from the beginning. We weren't focused on functional mushrooms or clinics or adjacent businesses or formulations of old drugs. It's always been new drugs.
And so on that, staying focused on new drugs, I think that's been important. And I think from my perspective, one of the things that's helped Mindset sort of find progress and succeed in challenging times right now. As I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, 2022 has been a rocky year for the psychedelic sector. It's a rocky year for the markets in general, but the psychedelic sector got hit particularly hard. We've seen some companies that were around a year ago that aren't around anymore. But following the journey of Mindset, it seems as if you guys have continued to make progress, particularly with your drug development pipeline. And so I want to, talk a little bit about that and maybe start with MSP 1014. I guess first give us an overview of what it is, just as a refresher, and talk about some of the progress that was made with it here throughout the year and how that translates into what lies ahead for it going into 2023.
Yeah, sure. So MSP 1014 is really one of it comes from what we call our family one. So those are the first set of drugs that we started to work on. And the term family one really just describes kind of a whole different set of drug design strategies that we applied to the psilocybin backbone. And we did it really to try to create novelty, so to create new drugs. But we approached this endeavor a little bit differently than a lot of other groups in the space who, there's always scientists out there who have kind of one idea or one or two ideas. We wanted to really try a whole bunch of different ideas and see, what came out of that. And that really describes family one. And family one is kind of in the if you will, like the beginning of our journey into psychedelic drug discovery. So some of what we learned in family one informs, a lot of the other families that we developed. Anyway, out of family one, we picked what we felt like was the most promising drug candidate, which is a drug that we call MSP 1014. MSP 1014 is a prodrug of psilocin, in the same way that psilocybin is a prodrug of psilocin. But what we've been able to observe in our preclinical work around 1014 is that we think it has certain advantages over psilocybin. Namely, we think that it's potentially a safer drug, and it is a somewhat stronger drug. And with a stronger drug, you can dose it at a lower level, which means that you've got a lower risk of side effects. But I think the biggest advancement with 1014 in the year is that we've really taken the steps we need to move it into clinical studies, so human studies next year. And we were able to get some really advantageous guidance from the UK regulator, the MHRA. So it's the UK kind of equivalent of the FDA, where the MHRA has said essentially that 1014 is similar enough to psilocybin that it can really piggyback off of psilocybin's safety track record. So we don't need to go through the sort of expensive and time-consuming toxicology studies that you need in order to go into human trials. And what's even better is that we can go right into treating patients in our first in-human trial. So typically, your phase one is really just safety. You're assessing safety. You're not getting any kind of a readout or signal around the efficacy of the drug because you're treating perfectly healthy people, volunteers. Here we can go right into treating patients, meaning that really expedites kind of the pathway for 1014 to move forward in a lot of ways, because by the end of this first human trial, which we should be launching in the first half of next year, we should have real, efficacy data. So that's really exciting for Mindset. Generally speaking, I think the last 3 years have been, about really setting Mindset up as probably the premier, biotech company in the space working on new drugs. And next year and going forward is about really establishing Mindset as the premier clinical stage, biotech company working with new drugs. And 1014 is a big part of that.
So it sounds like there's been some unique advantages that Mindset has had here in terms of being able to fast track the process, if you will, here with 1014 and some of the drug development pipeline that you've got. I want to talk a little bit how important has that been, especially in times right now where, the market, like we said, has been a bit challenging, and that creates challenges in terms of, access to capital for companies. But being able to find these advantages wherever you can, I think is important in order to navigate through these challenging waters. So I think that's important to highlight here, because I think there's a big reason why Mindset is where it is right now versus, again, some of the companies that, no longer standing here today. So talk a little bit about some of the advantages that Mindset has been able to utilize to their advantage in order to make the progress that they've made so far.
Yeah, you're 100% right, and a lot of that goes back to one of the things I said at the outset, which is that we've really, in some ways, defined ourselves by what we haven't done,
Mm-hmm.
and we've really tried, you have to excuse the old expression, but to stick to our knitting
Mm-hmm.
in terms of sticking to where we think our competitive advantage as a business, as an organization, really lies, and where we think our competitive advantage really lies is in the early stage drug discovery. So designing the molecules, creating IP, essentially like carving out some IP white space for ourselves, so that we have a high degree of confidence that what we're working on we're going to own and is novel. And then I also, the scientific team is the other side of it. It's really skilled at early stage, behavioral pharmacology. So understanding, what you need to do, what tests you need to do, which animal models to run in order to really get a sense of how the new drug differs
Mm-hmm.
from the benchmark drug, which in our case is, either psilocybin or DMT and 5-MeO DMT. Those are the drugs that we're benchmarking ourselves against. And there are a lot of CROs out there in the world that will do this kind of work for you, but Mindset really has sort of two of the top experts, in house. So our medicinal chemist Malik Selassie is exceptionally talented with a real track record of actually doing the actual design work of new drugs, and then helping kind of tease out differentiation. And Joe Arujo, who's our CSO and the other scientific co-founder, has had a long track record building up one of the preeminent, CROs in predictive animal models. So really, between those two and their network of CROs, we've been able to, I think, and this is really part of the secret sauce, is we've been able to, do some preliminary screening work on a very, very large number of drug candidates. And so we've really had a lot to choose from. I think the other key in getting the programs as advanced as we have in a relatively short span of time have been the partnerships, and principally the collaboration with Otsuka, which has given Mindset, I think, a huge leg up on the market in many respects.
Yeah, and you mentioned partnerships, and I want to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that, because I think they've played a critical role in helping to move the progress along for Mindset here this year. And whether it's partnerships with Cybin or the McQuaid Center for Strategic Research and Development, you have seemed to identify strategic partnerships that are working, to the benefit of the company. So give us a little bit of insight into the thought process behind these partnerships and the value that they're bringing here to Mindset Pharma.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's important to understand that these really were kind of one of the keys to our strategy from the very beginning. Again, we felt like what the scientific team was really good at was early stage discovery work. We could see the need. Our view was of the future was that pharma would want to get into the space. They would view first generation drugs as a good proof of concept, but they would gravitate towards new drugs. And so what we really wanted to do was create a business and products for what we felt like the future of the medical psychedelic space would look like. And we anticipated that there would be this demand from pharma or from groups with a clinical orientation and getting in bringing novel drugs to market. So the partnerships that you see today are very much an outgrowth and a purposeful outgrowth of that strategy of focusing on defensible IP, creating new drug assets that are novel to enough to be patentable, and also differentiated. In the beginning of the year, we announced the collaboration with the McQuaid Center for Strategic Research and Development, which is the development arm the U.S. development arm of Otsuka Pharmaceuticals, which is a top psychiatric drug company. That's been we've talked about it before, but that's been an enormous leg up for Mindset, Otsuka. We partnered with MSRD on our two sort of short acting drug families, and MSRD is funding the development expenses of those two families to take them to the end of phase one, which is in this market environment is huge benefit, because all that funding is non-dilutive, and they also made an upfront payment, a very significant upfront payment to Mindset as well. The funding's all non-dilutive, but I think what's really as valuable, frankly, if not more valuable than the funding, is just the access to their expertise.
Right.
They're developing psychiatric drugs and running clinical trials around the world, and they know an awful lot about drug differentiation. They know an awful lot about psychedelic, this class of drugs, and just it takes an enormous, it can't be overstated, it takes an enormously varied range of skills and specialized and expensive people to take a drug from a chemical structure all the way through the regulatory process, especially in North America, Europe, and ultimately to be qualified enough to get it to patients. And so what it's meant that Mindset's been able to really leverage their expertise and frankly not have to go out and hire experts at all these different levels of the value chain to actually do that work. So it's been just a huge advantage to Mindset. So we announced that back in January, and then in September we announced, I think it was the end of September, we announced a license agreement with Psilocybin, where there was a subset of our compounds that, based on what Psilocybin had said in the past, we thought could be interesting to them. We weren't working on them, and we were able to negotiate or come to a deal, and I think that's great. Psilocybin has more of a later stage development organization than Mindset, so again, it's really helpful for us to partner with people with groups who want to and are doing the work to actually advance drugs further, in the clinical process. And again, we weren't working on these drugs, so it's another kind of kick at the can for Mindset at commercializing what the scientific team has developed.
Yeah. So, hindsight is always 2020. I think looking back on some of the companies the biotech companies and drug development companies that were in this space, that are no longer here, I think it's easy for us to sit here, like the armchair quarterback, and basically say, well, maybe they overreached by trying to stretch themselves too thin by expanding into functional mushrooms. But a lot of the strategy behind that for some of these companies was so that there would be some sort of source of revenue in the meantime, while these drug development, pipelines were going through the entire process and whatnot. So you can kind of understand where their thinking was with that. But Mindset didn't go down that route, didn't go down that path. But with that in mind, you mentioned a little bit about funding and, being able to continue to find funding despite, a challenging environment. How is the company, able to take that funding, make sure that it's put towards where it needs to go, but with no revenue source coming in? I got to imagine that's got to create some challenges there. So how are you navigating through this tricky little time here, for Mindset?
Yeah, well, of course, Mindset has to be, careful and deliberate with how it allocates capital to across the different projects. We can't do everything at once, but as you can tell, it's never been our plan to try to do everything at once. I think every biotech company, regardless of the value of their programs, has to make the same kind of careful choices, and so Mindset's no different. I think the timing of these different partnerships have been really key for us. At the beginning of the year, Otsuka MSRD made a $5 million upfront payment. that was just for Mindset's own purposes, separate from their funding of the programs, which is significantly more than that. And then there was an upfront payment from Cybin in the September licensing. So we've been trying to structure partnerships in a way that they bring in non-dilutive capital, and I think as a result, we have had a pretty good runway. But again, we've kept the organization really small and really lean, and we haven't gone out and hired clinical experts and those kinds of folks. So I think it's helpful that our model is a low-cost model. We don't have our own facilities where everything gets subcontracted, without a lot of forward commitments. So I think we've got the right model for these more challenging times.
Yeah, and the non-dilutive capital, like I don't want to just pass over that because I think that's really important, because that, to me, at least as an outsider looking in, at least demonstrates that the company isn't just concerned about meeting its needs here today, but it's concerned also about the potential ramifications that bringing in capital today may have in a year, 2, 3, 4 years from now, which is important because it's all about setting a very strong foundation for the company. And just based on everything that you're talking about here, it really does seem like the company is putting very careful thought into building a strong foundation that isn't just going to support the company here today in the short term, but is going to support the company through the long term. So with that in mind, what do you feel Mindset has on its side here in terms of advantages to allow it to get through this phase here, where again it's kind of a phase where there's not a whole lot of activity happening, although there is a lot going on behind the scenes, don't get me wrong, but from the market sector perspective, there's not a whole lot to get people excited out there. But what is Mindset doing to position itself for a long-term run at this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the great irony of the market is that the retail interest kind of retrenched in the space right at a point in time where actually the programs really are the programs that effectively their capital is funding are making great strides and moving forward. And so what makes a biotech company more valuable is getting its drugs closer to regulatory approval through clinical trials and then ultimately to patients. And that's where all of our decisions at Mindset and really all our capital goes towards advancing drugs, both the drugs inside the Otsuka collaboration and some of the drugs outside of the collaboration, advancing them towards into and through clinical trials, and that is what will in the absence of this class of drugs, all going adult use rec positive tomorrow, that's what will make them the medical track biotech companies worth more is getting their drugs further ahead. So yes, we try not to get too worked up over the public market stuff, because we're part of a massively wider retrenchment across riskier assets, and that's just the market. That's going to happen. What matters is that you build for a business that's going to have value into the future, and that's what we've done from the very beginning is focus on where the space was headed. And I think we've so far that's worked out, because we're still here and we're moving forward, whereas others are falling by the wayside.
Yeah. Well, one of the exciting pieces of news that came out of the psychedelic space this year was the passing of Prop 122 in Colorado. I want to talk a little bit about, does that have any impact at all, on Mindset's short or long-term plans? And also just get your own personal take on the legal landscape here of psychedelics as we look ahead over the next couple of years.
Well, it's really fascinating to watch, isn't it? I mean, it's, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too. I think it doesn't affect Mindset in the short term. I think in the longer term, it's it's all a net positive for the medical psychedelic space.
Mhm.
I mean, my own view of how the space is, ultimately going to evolve is towards a fairly personalized medical regime where there will be first generation drugs, and there will be second and third generation drugs that have regulatory approval. Of course, I have the point of view that I want to make sure that things don't move in a direction without care and thoughtfulness, and
Mhm.
so that we don't engender a backlash against this class of drugs. Um, but I think overall it's great. It's great for the space. It's great for the FDA doesn't make decisions in a vacuum. I think it's overall like quite a net positive, because it's the voice of it's the voice of the people, and it really just goes to show how much desperation there is for new solutions for the mental health crisis.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because the mental health crisis, it just continues to become an even bigger problem, an even bigger issue across society. And so that for me is where I still see a lot of hope and potential here with psychedelics. And the other thing that I've noticed too is, as of late, we've started to see some of these mushroom dispensaries or mushroom shops popping up across North America. I know there was one in Toronto, one recently in Portland, Oregon, and it just reminds me of where the cannabis market space was 10, 15 years ago, when things were just starting to pick up, and you started to see companies and people sort of testing the limits, saying, okay, I know it's not legal yet, but I'm going to open
Right.
up my dispensary and open up my shop, and see how long I can get away with this. And we're starting to see people testing that, on the psychedelic side of things, specifically with mushrooms. So that to me, if nothing else, just demonstrates that, interest throughout society is continuing to grow and it's picking up momentum. And so long as that happens, one way or another, psychedelics are going to make their way into the mainstream. Yes, there's going to be a medical component, but I think over the course of time, there will come, a recreational component to it as well. But I, just, sharing my own thoughts on this, I see the potential here, because I do think that there is a very serious problem in this mental health crisis that needs to be solved. And I think psychedelics can play a pretty significant role in that. I mean, I would imagine you would agree, right?
I wholeheartedly agree. I
Yeah.
mean, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I we all we all have people in our lives who suffer terribly from these illnesses, and the immediacy of the effect of psychedelic medicine, the durability, and really just the interesting nature of the experience,
Mhm.
all I think argue for the drugs being available in at least in a therapeutic context. I lacking a crystal ball, I totally get the comparisons to cannabis and people testing the water. It would be really interesting to see how much that plays out in terms of following the path of cannabis. Like, I suspect, just given the strength of the drugs and the duration of the trip, that they'll have a harder time
Yeah.
following the kind of the cannabis rec use pathway. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll have and we'll have to see. But if nothing else, obviously, I'm a big believer in their medical use, and it's a shame that, frankly, these drugs were off limits for so long, and that it took all the dedicated research of really a handful of scientists and the non-for-profit groups to get us to where we are today.
Yeah.
But thank goodness they did the work, because we need society needs the help.
Yeah, no question about it. So last question here, to wrap things up. Yeah, I want you to give me your elevator pitch, and I want you to dumb it down, if you will, acting like if I was, in elementary school or whatever. But, give me your elevator pitch in terms of, why, someone should follow or jump aboard, not just follow. Let's say, let's go all in. Let's jump on the Mindset Pharma journey. Let's get on the Mindset Pharma train here in 2023. Why, based on, everything that and what, you can share with us, why would you encourage me to jump on the Mindset Pharma train going into 2023?
Because between our IP, our drug assets, and our partnerships, Mindset has the best chance of any company of getting a new and improved psychedelic therapeutic to market that is a best-in-class drug and a best-in-class novel psychedelic therapeutic has an immense opportunity to help patients on a scale that I don't think we've seen before.
Very good. Well, James Lanthier,
I mean, there might have been a few words in there that weren't quite at the 5-year-old level, but
I think it's great. I think it works, and yeah, that's an elevator pitch. That we're jumping off here on the 31st floor, so perfect timing on that. But James Lanthier, thank you so much. I appreciate this as always. Congratulations, on a solid year in 2022 and staying alive. So and keeping the beat going here.
Thanks so much, David. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, and so
thanks for the time.
Yeah. And for folks out there, I want to encourage you to visit Mindset Pharma. They're at mindsetpharma.com. So thank you again, James, and have a great day.
You as well. Thanks.